can't get my video to work. Sorry, everybody, but I'm going to go ahead and start and do our welcome and make our introduction and everything for our webinar tonight. Thank you, everybody, so much for coming on. We're super excited to have Skip talk about lambing preparation tonight. If you don't know myself, my name is Catherine Parsley, and I am the current president for the United Junior Suffolk Sheep Association. And we're the organization that is sponsoring this webinar tonight. We're super excited for you guys to be on. I just have a couple of announcements before we go ahead and get started. As far as questions go, you guys can either ask that throughout the webinar in the chat, or we can have a question time at the end of the presentation as well. If someone misses the presentation or you guys want to go back and look at something else that was talked about, these will be archived on the Facebook as well as suffolks.org if any of you guys want to go back and listen at a different time. So without further ado, I will introduce our speaker tonight. We have Mr. Skip Anderson here with us, and he's going to talk about lambing preparation. And he grew up on a small sheep farm in Wisconsin where he raised registered Hampshires, and he still has that flock with his parents today. He graduated in 2006 with a bachelor's in animal science from North Dakota State University, and he's currently working on his master's degree in animal science as well. And currently he is the shepherd at North Dakota State University for the sheep unit, where he oversees over 600 head of sheep. That consists of a lot of breeds like Hampshires, Columbias, Dorsets, and hair sheep as well. And he's served as the shepherd for over 10 years. And along with managing the sheep unit, he instructs the livestock sales and marketing class at North Dakota State University. So and he also enjoys judging sheep shows across the country, and he has a large collection of sheep magazines with over 3,500 magazines. So thank you, Skip, for being on today and being willing to be with us. So you can go ahead and take it from here.
All right, there we go. We were muted there. Well, thank you guys. Thank you, Catherine, for having me in the Junior Suffolk Association. I'm looking forward to visiting with you all a little bit about lambing prep. And certainly if you have questions throughout the talk, send those over in the chat and we'll have time to talk about things at the end. We're going to kind of try to shoot right down the middle in terms of content tonight. Some that I hope some new members and juniors can understand. And then also if there's some adults and seasoned breeders along with us this evening as well, I hope there's a few things that people can pick up on as well. So what I'll do is I've got a presentation I'll share with us right away here, and we'll get started. All right, so like Catherine said, my name is Skip Anderson and I'm the shepherd here at North Dakota State University. Have been in the sheep industry for over 30 years, and it's something that certainly is near and dear to me and something I really truly enjoy. The opportunity to serve as a shepherd at a university is an exciting one because every day you get to work with sheep, but also you get to work with students. And being able to blend those two activities together has really been an enjoyable experience for me, going along as I pursue my further education, but also helping those with their education has also been really enjoyable. And it's days where we get students that have never seen an animal be born or have the opportunity to work with baby lambs come out to our facility is really enjoyable from my career standpoint. So as we get started and talking about lambing preparation, I think it's always fun for us as sheep people to have a little bit of humor that goes along with it. And I know all of you that are online this evening would basically do anything for your flock. They are near and dear to our hearts. They're those sheep that we put a lot of extra time into. It's an activity that we enjoy doing. So I can guarantee you that's not me, but if we had to strap a ewe to our mini bike and drive her back to the barn, us as shepherds would probably do that if we had to. So as we move into our talk here tonight, I've got a little bit of a menu up here right now that are going to be some of the topics we're going to talk about. The first one is we're going to dive into a management timeline and schedule. So many times here at the university, I get calls from producers or people saying, hey, when should I be doing this? Or what's a good time to be vaccinating or deworming? Or when it comes to lambing, what should I be looking for? So I went ahead tonight and put together a timeline and a schedule that will work through that. Hopefully maybe you can morph into your own or take bits and pieces that fit into your management scheme. I'm not saying that this is the concrete method way of doing it, but it's something that's worked for us and something that has kind of evolved in my 10 years here at North Dakota State University. The next thing we're going to talk about is putting together a lambing kit and what are those supplies that you need. I think being prepared for lambing means preparing your sheep and preparing your facility, but also preparing the supplies that you need. What do you absolutely need to have on hand? And what are some of those things that you maybe should have on hand, but hope you never have to use? The next part, we'll also visit a little bit about nutrition. And I am not a nutritionist whatsoever. I'm a person who enjoys feeding sheep. I think feeding sheep is a visual type task. It's one of those things that you do as much physical work feeding sheep as you do with your eyes when it comes to nutrition. So we're going to talk just about the basics of what we need to do to our ewes and how we need to go about it, and maybe some timeline that's associated with the nutrition plane of your ewes in order to get them on the right path for a successful lambing season. Then we'll talk briefly on facilities. I think facilities are one of the pieces of the puzzle when it comes to prepping for lambing that makes the biggest difference. They are the kind of the key holder to all sorts of the activities that happen. So much of health and just successfulness of your lambing program starts with your facilities. If you have those things all in order first, lambing gets a lot easier. The next section we'll talk about is what should you have in your pharmacy? What drugs should you have around, or what medications, what vaccines should you possibly have? Again, these are just suggestions on what a person might want to have in their medicine cabinet or what they should have on hand. Again, working with your veterinarian is a great way to solidify that. Then I've got a few tips and pointers in there that I wanted to share with you, things that I've seen in my years of lambing out a bunch of sheep. And some of them are going to be pretty common that a lot of you have seen, and maybe some of them are a little bit different, but hopefully it's something that you can use in your program to make it easier when you're getting your sheep ready for lambing and once lambing actually happens. And then we'll take some questions. We'll do a wrap up. I love hearing from you guys. I think a great webinar is one that's interactive and gets people talking and gets discussion. I think people learn from each other just as well as they learn listening to somebody. So if there's something that you want to share or think is useful to the conversation, we'd love to hear it, that somebody in the room might be also asking that same question. So when I was given the topic of lambing preparation, I got thinking, I sat down and jotted on a piece of paper, what are those things that you need to do to prep for lambing? Well, I wrote down, I said, well, we've got to get our facilities in order. We've got to have this. Well, it just started snowballing. And by the time it got all the way through it, we were basically back on the calendar to when that ewe just finished lambing the year before. So every management step that you do throughout the year will ultimately impact your lambing preparation. So the time that you lambs until you get her weaned, until you get her out on grass and then back in to get bred, all of those steps go into prepping her for the next year's lamb crop. So I always say lambing prep is a year-long process and it never really ends. We're not going to go through a whole year's calendar worth of sheep management, but we'll get down to kind of the high points when it comes to getting into lambing. And you can see by the photos here that there's preparation that's gone on throughout the entire year. So the first thing I did was I wanted to always share with people kind of a management timeline. And like I said earlier, we get a lot of questions from people about what should I be doing at these times and what should I do throughout the year to make my lambing season successful. So as you can see, it looks like a lot of dates and a lot of lines and a lot of information kind of put together here, but we'll kind of try to walk through this in a systematic way that hopefully helps you visualize what we're looking for. And when I went ahead and started building this calendar or this timeline for lambing preparation, I actually started over here with when the lambs are going to arrive. By putting the desired lambing date as that first point to work with, then you can build your calendar working backwards. Now, granted, it's not something you can do the day before you get started, but before you get lambing, but once you get into it, this will hopefully make sense going forward. So once we get that desired lambing date figured out and where you want to be, you can build your lambing calendar from there. So once we get that, let's jump over to pre-breeding. Pre-breeding is the time when that gives you the opportunity as a shepherd to work with your sheep, go through them, sort through them, maybe make those final culling decisions that need to be done. It gives you that chance to maybe body condition score your ewes, see where they're at, look through your records from the previous years and say, well, this ewe wasn't the best when it came to being a mother, or maybe this ewe doesn't have the greatest udder and she needs to be culled from our program. So you go ahead and make those decisions before you start sorting your groups into breeding groups and start vaccinating those ewes, or start putting some feed resources into them in terms of flushing. When it comes to that pre-breeding time, we're looking at about 60 days prior to turning your rams in, or when you are going to possibly be AIing a set of ewes. So that 60 days gives us a little bit of time to do a few things to get everything in order before we turn those rams in, to ensure that we have a great breeding season, to ensure that we get those ewes bred up tight, get them bred up early, and ask them to do everything we're looking for them to do. This is the time when you're maybe going to start putting a little more feed resources into your ewes. A lot of times when we talk about flushing those ewes, it's giving them a higher plane of nutrition, whether we're maybe feeding them a pound or two of shell corn before they get bred, before we turn the rams in. Maybe it's using a high quality forage, some better alfalfa you can flush your ewes on, or you can even flush your ewes on good lush pasture. So if you have a young tender pasture that you haven't grazed a lot of sheep on, or that you mowed it for hay and it's come back really nice and young and tender, you can rotate ewes onto that before breeding season to hopefully increase that number of lambs born. And that's ultimately what we're trying to do when we're flushing those ewes before we breed them, is to try to get those ewes to ovulate the best they can and get maybe a couple more lambs out of each ewe that will ultimately increase profitability and production at the end of the day. Also, that time is when you want to go ahead and do your pre-breeding vaccinations. Now, vaccinations in terms of pre-breeding, such as Campylobacter and chlamydia and those types of abortive vaccines, that's kind of up to you in terms of what you want to do with those. Some people vaccinate religiously and do it every year. Other people have never vaccinated their sheep for abortive diseases, and that's totally fine. A lot of times people vaccinate, especially when maybe they're bringing in a new set of ewes, they purchase some animals, they're introducing a few new animals into their flock. They want to try to protect themselves from a few of those abortive diseases. A lot of times you might not have a problem. You might not have a chlamydia or a Vibrio or Campylobacter outbreak in your flock, so you don't have to necessarily worry about it. But if you are going to vaccinate, a lot of those vaccines need to be done before breeding, or at least the first round gets started before you turn your rams in. And the chlamydia vaccine is given 60 days before breeding, and then a booster shot 30 days before breeding. The Campylobacter vaccine is done just shortly before breeding. So those are some that you can get into your ewes right off the bat. Possibly you could do some deworming at that time as well. You maybe want to push that a little further back than maybe that 30 or 60 day window before you start breeding as well. But once you dive into that, you're well on your path to hopefully getting your lambing season to be a successful one. Once you get to that point and you turn your rams out, it's breeding season. You've got your mating groups figured out, your ram's ready to go. He's semen checked, he's fertile, he's ready to go. You turn him out with your ewes and you let it go. And hopefully your ewes are cycling. If you're using cedars to synchronize those ewes, you're hopefully getting them bred up tight. If you're using marking harnesses or crayons to detect estrus, those certainly will give you an indication on how your ewes are cycling, and hopefully you're getting those ewes bred and settled. And what I like to recommend during that first 45-ish days of pregnancy, so once you have your rams out, I really try to limit how much work or how much involvement you have to work with your sheep. Those are the real crucial or critical times when that early pregnancy is being established. So I try to have everything done that needs to be done with those ewes before breeding, and then we're not going to touch them until we get into further along in gestation, just to ensure that we've got that pregnancy strong and held, and we're not bumping those ewes around and maybe knocking some of those pregnancies out. So once you get through that, then we start getting into a few other things that we can do in terms of management that make our lives easier as shepherds. And one of those is ultrasounding for pregnancy. Now, some of you have access to people that can come in and ultrasound your ewes. Sometimes you've got veterinarians who are very good at ultrasounding and have all the equipment. You're working with a technician who can count fetuses, a person that can come in and tell you number of days that they're bred. Makes our lives as shepherds really, really easy. But there's very few people that have that talent and the ability to do that. A lot of times, folks that are doing ultrasounding, especially when it comes to sheep, just don't see enough of them veterinarian-wise to call those number of days or call those number of fetuses. So we basically get the information that they're either pregnant or open. And sometimes that's better than nothing, to be able to say that, yes, these ewes are pregnant, or no, this ewe is open. And then you can make your decisions in terms of culling as you go forward based on that information. If you do have the opportunity to get your ewes ultrasounded, I highly recommend it. And a lot of times, depending on how good your technician is, you can pick up pregnancy. But that takes a person who's pretty talented and pretty good. Once they get along to about 45 days to 100 days, they're really easy to pick up when it comes to ultrasounding. The further along they get, when you get into that 100-day window and further past that, they'll tell you that they're pregnant or open and can see fetus, can see rib cage, spine, those types of things on the lamb. It's really tough to tell number of fetuses when they get that far along or those fetuses get that big. So they can tell you pregnant or open the further along they go. Also, this might be the time if some of you don't have access to a person who can ultrasound, to use the BioPrin pregnancy test. So draw some blood and you can ship that blood off as early as, I believe it's 35 days in sheep to detect pregnancy. And that's something that we've used as well. So if you're unfamiliar with that, do a quick Google search about pregnancy detection using blood, and you can find out some information on where you can send some of those samples off to pregnancy tests that way, which has been very useful to use for us as well. This is be a good time when in that 60 to 90 day window when you need to booster that Campylobacter vaccine, that Vibrio vaccine. If you're going to go ahead and use that program and use that protocol, this is when you would be putting that in. About mid-gestation is what they highly recommend if you read the bottle on getting that vaccine into those ewes. Then as we move along into our calendar here. The next spot that kind of comes up on the list that I have put together here is shearing or crutching your ewes. And we'll get into this a little further as our discussion goes on. But a lot of times shearing before lambing is a beneficial tool. It's a great practice to get into. It can really help you as a shepherd to give you some of those visual indicators on where your ewes are in terms of pregnancy. Are we seeing some signs of udder? Are we seeing some signs of ewes getting bigger around and looking pregnant. Also, it helps us in terms of body condition scoring our ewes and making sure that they're staying in the proper shape that we want them to do or to be when it comes to prepping for lambing. And if you don't shear your ewes, or your facilities don't allow you to, or you don't have a shearer that's available to shear your ewes at this time, you can go ahead and crutch them. And that is simply removing the wool from the udder and the backside of the sheep, around her vulva and around her tail, just to clean the backside of that sheep up. It makes it cleaner and easier when she's lambing, and also makes it a little easier for those lambs to find the udder once they do start nursing and after they do lamb. So it's something that I do highly recommend, but really that's totally up to you when you want to shear your ewes. But we'll get into a few of the benefits and some of the ideas of that when we move along further. The next one I really want to hit on here is about day 100, and that's when we need to start increasing the nutritional plane on these ewes, these pregnant ewes. The last 4 to 6 weeks are when those fetuses are growing the most. It's kind of the most crucial time when it comes to getting those ewes in shape for lambing. Those lambs are really growing. We want to make sure that every ounce of feed that we're putting in those ewes is going into the lambs, but also maintaining that ewe and keeping her in good shape and in good flesh. And by increasing that nutritional plane, it really limits us from having that issue of pregnancy toxemia and twin lambs disease. And then the next area where we'll visit a little bit here too is when it comes to giving our sheep CD&T boosters. We get the Clostridium type D and tetanus shot into those ewes for enterotoxemia. I like to give that about 3 to 4 weeks prior to lambing. And the purpose for that is by putting it into those ewes at that time, we are passing that maternal antibody onto the offspring here that puts those lambs in good shape for about 30 days once they're born. And it allows us to not have to vaccinate young lambs when they don't have much of an immune system. We're getting that maternal antibody passed to those offspring through the ewes by putting that shot into them about 3 to 4 weeks before they lamb. So again, when it comes to this, you can double up on a few things, or try to, if you only have time to work your ewes through the chute one time, maybe try to hit a time that you can do multiple of these activities throughout the time to make that work for you. And then ultimately that lambing window is about 143 to 148 days. There are some ewes that will lamb a little earlier than that, and there's some ewes that will go a little bit longer. But when it comes down to it, I would say about 90% of the ewes are going to fall into that 143 to 148 day window. And I will certainly be able to share these slides with you if this is something that is useful, or think that you can maybe build a program off of using this as a template. You are certainly welcome to. Are there any questions on the management timeline? I know there's a lot of moving parts on here, and you might have some questions as it goes along, but if you have any of those, we can take just a moment and maybe answer 1 or 2 of them.
We've got one question here from the chat. Somebody said, what do you mean when you say bred up tight?
When I say bred up tight, that means trying to get your ewes bred together in a group where they're lambing in a small lambing window. So rather than having them all spread out maybe over 30 or 40 days, you're getting those ewes synchronized together in a group where they're lambing. Maybe your whole group is lambing in maybe a 10-day window. Now that's really tough to do, but if you can get them in even one heat cycle in a 17-day window, is what we mean by getting them bred up tight together, where lambing season or lambing window is a lot shorter. Any other questions? All right, well, we'll move on here. So the next thing I want to talk about is kind of those lambing kit essentials. So what is that thing that you're going to take with you when you're lambing? Are you building a lambing kit, something that you have in a little tote that you take with you? Is it a toolbox that you bring along with you? Is it something that's in the barn that you keep with you at all times? And this is a list of a few items that I have in my lambing kit that I never lamb a ewe without having. And the first one is having some sleeves and gloves. Now, some people use them, some people don't. I tend to try to use a sleeve or a glove all the time whenever I'm handling newborn lambs, when I have to maybe assist with a birth. I just think it's safe for man and beast to be wearing a sleeve when it comes to lambing those sheep. I also caution when you are working around ewes and lambing fluids, especially females, and especially women that might be pregnant or want to be pregnant, there is a chance for some of those abortive diseases to pass from animals to humans. And I certainly caution you, if you have the opportunity and can avoid the lambing room while you're pregnant, I highly recommend it. And if you can't, to be extra careful, wearing sleeves, wearing gloves, washing up, just for your safety and the safety of your pregnancy going forward. The next thing that I always take with me is towels. Now, we know that the ewe should be doing her job and getting those lambs dry and getting them cleaned up. But sometimes you're in Fargo, North Dakota, and it's 35 below zero and it's 10 degrees in your barn, and you want to get those lambs dry and moved as quick as possible. So I always keep a few towels with me. It never hurts to wipe off faces, noses, just to get them cleaned up a little quicker, help that ewe along, especially if maybe she's the first time lambing ewe and she had a set of twins, or maybe you've got multiples, or maybe you got a lamb that's a little bit slow or was a difficult pull. It's always nice to have some towels. How you get your towels, that's totally up to you. You can buy some of your towels. I caution you, if you're going to take towels from your house, make sure you get 100% permission from the keeper of the towels in your house, because you don't want to be taking the nice fancy house guest towels out to the barn with you. Even if you are drying off your next stud ram, I would recommend getting permission to use those towels. How we get a few of our towels here is every year I just call a few of the local hotels and ask if they have any towels that are maybe either torn or they're ripped, or they have makeup stains on them or something that they need to get rid of and they can't use them with their guests anymore. You can sometimes pick up some towels from hotels and they're just gonna toss them or get rid of them. So they work great for lambing towels. So sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but give a call to a local hotel and see if they have a few that are just laying around that they can't use. I always keep OB lube with me. I think it's always important to, if you have to go in a ewe to pull a lamb or check a ewe, to use some lube. It just makes it a lot easier when it comes to pulling a lamb, or if you have big hands when going into a ewe, it certainly helps to make that task a little bit easier on the ewe. Always have some iodine with you to dip navels. Have a dip cup of some kind, or maybe a spray bottle. I use just a dip cup from a dairy. So we use that for like a teat dip cup. Works really good to get iodine on those navels. You can put that right over the navel of the lamb and put iodine on it. And then also carry a scissors with you, just in case if you've got one that that navel's really long, it needs to be clipped. Have a good sharp scissors to clip that if you have to. I always have a halter with me, regardless. We've got 600 sheep here at the NDSU sheep unit, and there's probably only about 3 sheep that are halter broke. But having that halter available, if you have to tie a ewe up, if you need to restrain a ewe in some way, shape, or form, you can do that to get her held. If you're trying to get a lamb to nurse, if you need to hold her and check her for a second lamb or something, and she's a little bit flighty in the lambing jug, a halter will help you restrain her just a little bit. I always have a lamb tube or a bottle or a nipple with me. Hopefully you never have to use those, but if you do have to get some colostrum into a lamb easy, you have that tube or you have that bottle and you have that nipple to get that lamb started. Most of the time we don't have to use them. But if you are running into a situation where maybe you have a set of triplets and you want to get them started, or if you have a lamb that's a little bit behind or a little bit slower, they sometimes will help you serve as a good tool to get those started a little quicker. I always have a lamb sling and a scale with us. Now that's probably one that isn't as necessary for a lot of other people, but I just like to know what our lambs are weighing at birth. It's nice to slip a lamb into a sling and carry it with you when you're moving it from your drop area to your lambing jugs. You can see and smell that lamb, and she'll follow it while it's in that sling. It can help you get them moved pretty easily and safely. Because sometimes if you're wearing gloves and you're holding on to those lambs, they do get a little bit slippery. And then finally, I always have a notebook with me to write down notes. If you're lambing a bunch of sheep, no matter how good of a shepherd you are, you can't remember everything that's happened. You've got to be able to write some of those things down. So I like to have my records with me, even if it's as simple as writing down that the ewe was a good mom, that she had great milk, that she was a little bit flighty when she lambed, whatever the case may be. Having those records makes it very useful when it comes to keeping track of information going forward. So these are a list of the few things that I keep with me that are the absolute essentials. Things that will, if it's a perfect birth, if everything goes to plan, you probably don't have to use many of these, but these are things that I'll never leave home without. Now, here are a few tools that are probably necessary to have, but I call these the tools you hope you never have to use. But I always do say too, if it's a lot better to purchase these and have them and never have to use them than to get in a situation where you wish you did have them. So a U-spoon or a prolapse retainer is probably one of the good tools to have around. As those ewes get heavier with lambs, they sometimes will vaginally prolapse, and you need to put a spoon in them to hold that in, to keep everything together, to get that ewe to the finish line in terms of lambing. So keeping a U-spoon or a prolapse retainer on hand is a good one to have. Also possibly using a prolapse harness. You can purchase prolapse harnesses, or you can use a ram marking harness and use a few ropes to try to make a harness. I've never actually done that. I've seen it used by a lot of people, and very successful shepherds have always used a ram marking harness by putting that on a ewe with a series of ropes to make a prolapse harness. So I don't know how to put one of those together, but you can definitely find that online or visit with other sheep people on how to do that. I always keep an S-shaped needle and some umbilical tape around. If you have to potentially put a uterus back into a sheep on a prolapse uterus, or if you have a ewe that you're worried about prolapsing, you can put a stitch into her and hold her together until she has, until that swelling has gone down, until she's kind of past her contractions. Sometimes you have to put a stitch into a ewe in order to prevent a big problem from happening. Every time I have to go into a ewe, I do put a uterine bolus in her. So an internal antibiotic just to keep that uterine environment healthy. Every time you have to go in her, you can get those boluses through just about any livestock animal health supplier. You can get those boluses to put directly into the uterus of the ewe. The next one, you might ask why we keep freezer bags or some trash bags around. Well, you're always going to run into some problems with sheep. There's no way around it. We run into issues, we run into challenges. So I like to keep some bags around that if you have a abortion that you need to collect some specimens, you need to collect a fetus, you can put a lamb in a trash bag, you can seal it up and put it in your barn refrigerator if you have to, until you can get it to your veterinarian. A lot of times when you do have an abortion, they want you to try to collect some placenta, and a sheep placenta will fit great in a gallon freezer bag. So you can put that in there, throw that in your barn refrigerator until you can get that to your vet, and then they can pass that on to your state diagnostic lab, or where they can run and see what problems you might have going on. The placenta is a great piece of information when it comes to diagnosing a lot of problems when it comes to abortions. So make sure by collecting that placenta, you've got the tools to do it in, and just by keeping some freezer bags around makes that really pretty easy. Frozen colostrum and milk replacers, also good things to have around. Hopefully your ewes are milking great. You never have to use it. But if you've been in the sheep industry long enough, you know that you're going to probably have to use it. So if you have access to some frozen colostrum, maybe like in the picture here, this was a ewe that had a single lamb and had an abundance of colostrum. So we were able to harvest a little bit from her. We put it in freezer bags and we froze that we can use and thaw in hot water when we have a ewe that might be short of colostrum, or maybe a set of triplets that we want to ensure that we get some into her. If you don't have access to that, you can purchase synthetic colostrum through sheep supply dealers. You can get that and utilize that with your sheep. Make sure that it's for sheep specifically if you're buying some of the synthetic colostrums. Same thing with milk replacers. And then also in emergency situations, I keep some cow colostrum around. Here at the NDSU dairy, we milk 110 registered Holsteins. So I have an endless supply of being able to capture some of the colostrum from some of those cows. Now I know it's not perfect, but it definitely helps when you're in a bind. So we get a bucket of that from our dairy, and then we portion it out into small freezer bags, or we put it in ice cube trays and freeze it. And then we have those little packets of colostrum if we need it. Sometimes you might run into needing a head gate and grafting tools to make your life a little bit easier to bum a triplet from one ewe onto a ewe that maybe has a single. You might need a head gate to help with that. And then supplies to set broken legs. If you're going to have some sheep, you're probably going to run into some issues where you might get a lamb stepped on. Sometimes maybe even a difficult birth. A lamb might break a leg, and you run into a problem. You got to get those set. I just go down to the local hardware store and ask the paint department if I can get a few of their wooden paint stir sticks. Work really good for setting lambs' legs. They're light, they're solid. You can put 3 or 4 of them around a lamb's leg and wrap it with some cotton and some vet wrap, and you can set some legs pretty decently by using those. I've seen all sorts of supplies being used to set broken legs. You can get even some dog splints that work sometimes, but I've seen people use lots of products to set broken legs, and people have been very successful with it. And no matter how many sheep people you talk to, they've got some way to set a broken leg. So again, these are items that you probably should have around just in case. But again, like I said, I hope you never have to use them.
I've got one question here for you.
Yes, ma'am. Yep.
Sorry, go ahead. So it's a scenario we've got here. So we had a first time mama deliver quads. One didn't make it, and we had one on a bottle. How long would you recommend for that quick bottle help to successfully get the baby back on the mother?
Well, I guess when it comes to a situation like that, if you've got 2 lambs on the ewe and she's raising them and they're thriving, especially a first time mother, depending on what breed it is as well. But me personally, I might try to let her raise that set of twins and keep that 3rd lamb on a bottle. And hopefully maybe you've got another ewe that with a single that you can get it off to it. Or the quicker you can convert it back to the ewe, the better. Once lambs get used to a bottle, going back to a ewe is a little bit challenging. So you probably only have about a day window to get that lamb from that bottle back onto that ewe. And even still, it's going to take a little bit of a challenge to get them back going on that ewe. So I hope that answered the question. If the ewe is doing great with a set of twins, those 2 lambs are thriving, and you think she can only raise those 2, I'd let her raise the 2. I'd keep the 3rd lamb on a bottle. But if you think she can raise the 3rd, I would do it as soon as possible. Does that answer your question or fit the situation?
She said thank you.
Okay, sounds great. So when it comes to nutrition is probably one of the most important parts. And no matter how long you're in the sheep business, people will say that Feeding sheep is one of the most important things that you have to do in order to be successful. And I always say you need to keep your ewes in good working shape. And that there's a big interpretation about what does good working shape mean. There's a number system when it comes to body condition scoring your sheep, and we don't really use that in sheep as much as we see in maybe cattle, for example. But I always say keep your ewes fleshy looking, I guess. Again, that's a lot to interpret, or a lot of difference of opinion on what that means, but do what works for you. If your ewes are doing everything you ask them to, then they're probably in good working shape. If you're running into some problems where they're getting really thin after you wean their lambs off, if it's really hard for them to come back after weaning in terms of condition, maybe you're pushing them a little too hard, and maybe they need to be eased along earlier in terms of being fed. And also late gestation is not a good time to try to play catch up if you think your ewes are too thin. As we talked earlier, those last 4 to 6 weeks are the most crucial when that lamb is really growing, when that fetus is growing in size. That's not the time to say, man, we really got to push these ewes in order to get them fleshed back up. That's the time when you need to be focusing about the lambs inside them, rather than trying to put condition on your ewes. We've got plenty of months when we can put condition on them a lot easier when they're not working for us. And then finally, thin ewes just provide a snowball of problems. Ewes that are behind, they tend to not milk the best, and therefore they don't milk the best. You're maybe having to artificially rear some lambs, or they're really getting milked down and they're really getting thin, and it's tough to put condition back on those girls. And then that trickles over into next season's breeding season. They're not as fertile, they're not breeding up as well, and it just becomes a whole other problem again going forward. So my advice is put a little extra into your sheep when you need to, keep them in good shape, and that little extra throughout the year will make it a lot easier when it comes to lambing time for you, and then ultimately getting them back into production the next year. So as we talked, nutritional needs increase the last 4 to 6 weeks of pregnancy. That's when you really notice those ewes getting big. That's when you notice they're really starting to show that they're pregnant. They look pregnant. They're getting some belly on them. They're really getting round. You can tell that those fetuses are really growing. They're starting to see a little bit of udder development during that time. And that's when nutrition really needs to pick up. That's when you should be increasing your energy into those sheep. And it's when you should start increasing their higher plane of nutrition. So maybe that's feeding them a little bit more, feeding them a little bit higher quality feeds. So bumping up the quality of forages you're putting into them. Maybe that's increasing a little bit of their diet that you're feeding them, whether that might be shell corn or a mixed diet. Putting the higher energy feeds into those ewes during that time will help you to prevent pregnancy toxemia, limit ketosis and twin lamb disease, just by getting those energy feeds into them during those last 4 to 6 weeks of pregnancy. This is where you're going to provide some high quality forage. If you've got your best alfalfa, that's when you're going to want to save it for those last 4 to 6 weeks, and then carry that over through lactation. This is where we're going to use some higher energy feeds if we have to, and then also provide some supplements, whether that's maybe some lick tubs or some kind of molasses. Usually works well by adding molasses to your feed, or molasses in some lick tubs. Those ewes really start hitting that during those times. And then salt and mineral is crucial all year. Work with your feed dealers, work with your nutritionists to develop a salt and mineral plan that you can keep your ewes on all year long. A lot of times people will get pretty lax on having mineral out for their sheep, and then decide they need to put some into them maybe during breeding season or during gestation or lactation, and they're not doing it throughout the year. Keep them on that same plane of a salt and mineral program all year long, making sure that your ewes are getting all the essentials. I know iodine is a big one when it comes to lamb survival and lamb growth and lamb development. We've actually in one of our research flocks here, we did see an issue with some iodine deficiency. So we had to make a few changes that way, and saw some really interesting developmental challenges in some of those lambs that were iodine deficient. And then the last one is keeping an eye on the weather. If you're in the upper Midwest this time of year, we've had a beautiful late fall, and our start of winter has been pleasant, but most years it's not like this. Depending on where you're tuning in from, keep an eye on the weather. When those weather changes, when it gets cold, those nutritional needs change as well. And that really just comes with experience. And it's something that you can't necessarily put a number of pounds on or how much you should put into them. Again, I say feeding sheep is kind of by sight and kind of by feel. And you need to see what works for you, and making sure that they're cleaning up what you're giving them, staying in good shape, staying in good condition, and doing all of those things throughout the year to make your prep for lambing so much easier as you go forward. Are there any questions on nutrition? Again, I am not a nutritionist by any means, but certainly can hopefully add some insight if there's any questions on that. All right. So now let's talk about facilities. And if you're like me, every year that lambing time, getting your barn ready is an exciting one. You like to get your lambing pens all set up. You love to put that first set of fresh straw down. You like to get your barn all prepped. It's one of those things where it's that new beginning every year. You get to open up a new Christmas present when those lambs are born. But when it comes to your facilities, depending on how many sheep you have or how big your facility is, I always like to lamb RUs in what I call a drop area or a drop pen. And that is in an area where they're with other sheep. They're in an area where they can get plenty of space. And when it comes to plenty of space, where all your ewes can lay down, they've got some room to exercise and move. It's certainly ample when it comes to having enough space. If they seem crowded to you, they're probably crowded. Where they can lay down and spread out and feel comfortable, and granted, we know sheep like to be by other sheep, so they're going to bunch up together, but being able to have plenty of space around them is a good thing. The other part that I can't stress enough is having plenty of feeder space. Even extra feeder space, I think, in my opinion, is valuable. Where ewes don't have to really push and struggle and squeeze to try to get feed, give them a little extra room. If you've got one extra hole in your feeder for one extra sheep, try to put another feeder in there if you have it. Give them just a little bit of extra space. We want those ewes to not have to struggle to eat or not have to fight so hard to eat, because that's when they really start pushing and really start straining. You can run into some problems and challenges that way. So give them plenty of space. And also exercise is really important when it comes to pregnant ewes. And there's times here in the upper Midwest where we get some snowstorms, we get some pretty cold weather where we can't get our sheep outside. They don't have the opportunity to really get out and go. So what we try to do if we're feeding our sheep in the barns, we try to feed them opposite of the water. So they have to walk back and forth to get from one end to the other. They're at least getting some extra steps in. Having fresh air, so good ventilation is also one thing that's really valuable. And then trying to keep your buildings free of moisture. So if you're in a pole building, if they sometimes sweat or you get some condensation in there, maybe making sure that it's insulated or running some exhaust fans to try to keep the moisture down. Sheep can take a lot of cold and fresh air, but it's when you start mixing that moisture and humidity with that cold air is when we run into some problems. And then ewes prefer to be by other sheep. So having them in an area where they can lamb, where they see other sheep, they feel a lot more comfortable. Then when it comes to your lambing jugs, you can go to 100 different farms and see 100 different types of lambing pens and lambing situations. these are a few shots from the NDSU sheep unit that we have here. And I'll be the first to say we use 4x5 lambing jugs, and they are pretty small for some bigger ewes. So I know this is sponsored by the Suffolk group, so I'm sure we have some Suffolk breeders with some big ewes where a 4x5, they would be touching corner to corner in some of those. So I would prefer a bigger lambing jug if possible. When it comes to our commercial Dorset ewes, a 4x5 is great. They work really well to get those ewes in there and with their lambs. But I would prefer them to be bigger, maybe 5x5, or I've even seen 5x8s. I've even seen 10x10 lambing pens, depending on what you have for facilities and what you have for numbers of sheep. So whatever works for you, I just say make sure that there's plenty of room that those ewes can get up and lay down, that the lambs can maybe escape a little bit from the ewe. If you can, even put some safety areas in one of the corners with maybe a heat lamp or even just a regular light bulb. Babies will naturally head towards light. So if you even put just a regular light bulb above your lambing pen in one corner, those lambs will tend to go to that and lay underneath it, which will keep it safer from ewes laying on their lambs or maybe stepping on them. And then the last thing, when it comes to your lambing room or where your lambing jugs are, any way that you can eliminate drafts and reduce moisture will definitely help with lamb health. And what I always tell people is if you're 5 foot or 6 foot tall, usually the air is pretty good where you're standing, but get down on your hands and knees and get down on floor level where the baby lambs are and take a big whiff of the air down there. And if it's strong down on that level, think of that on those young lamb baby lungs. The lungs on those lambs is going to be challenging. And also I say too, if you kneel down and your knee is wet, you probably should put fresh bedding down or change the bedding, because that moisture in there is definitely going to be a problem. We always clean all of our lambing jugs after each ewe. So everything is pitched out, cleaned out, and barn limed down before the next ewe moves in. One thing I want to add when it comes to heat lamps is be extra careful. There's been too many times I've heard stories of barns that caught on fire because of heat lamps. So check them, make sure they're clean, get rid of the dust, have a safe place for them where sheep can't grab them, can't move them around, they can't fall, because nobody wants to hear about a barn fire and the loss of a bunch of ewes and lambs. So what to keep in your pharmacy? Antibiotics are a good one. We won't probably dig too horribly deep into, do we have a question on facilities first?
Yes. It
Okay.
says, how long do you keep them in lambing jugs?
We tend to keep ours in the lambing jug about 2 to 3 days if we have the time and the space. There's times where we have had them in the lambing jug 12 hours and we've had to move them out. There's times where I've had a ewe and lamb in the lambing jug for 6 days because a lamb was a little bit slow, or a ewe had a problem, or she needed to be watched a little bit closer. But most of the time we try to move them out, and 2 to 3 days is typically when I like to move them out, when the lambs have found their feet, they've bonded well with their moms. And also that gives us time to process them. We band tails, tag, we tattoo them. We do everything to those lambs to set them on their way once they leave the lambing jug. Because when you're lambing a bunch of sheep, you don't want to have to go back and do some of those things later. The other thing we do when the ewe lambs that leaves the jug is we also trim her feet. I think it's a great time to work your ewes at that time. When we're lambing 200 ewes in a group, it's a lot easier to trim feet on 6 or 8 when they're leaving the jug than it is to do all 200 at one time. So try to minimize your labor by doubling up on doing some of those tasks when they're coming through the lambing room. Any other questions with that?
Oh, never mind.
Okay. So what to keep in your pharmacy, what to keep in your medicine cabinet, what should you have on hand? Probably a good set of antibiotics is good to have around. Over-the-counter antibiotics are great, penicillin, LA200, LA300, things that you can get through your vet supply or your vet health supplier. There are some antibiotics that will take a prescription that you need to work with your veterinarian in order to get some of those. But having some kind of antibiotics available certainly helps. If you have to go in a ewe or you have a ewe that has a difficult lambing, it's probably good to even get some penicillin on board after you take care of her. So work closely with your veterinarian on what to keep around. A lot of times you'll get a bottle of something and it'll expire before you end up using it all. So just find those things that work best for you. If you've got a small number of sheep, over-the-counter antibiotics do help when you certainly need them. Some kind of pain relief. Banamine is one that does work. If you run into some problems, you've got to work with a veterinarian in order to get some Banamine on hand, but having some of those products will help. Vaccines we touched on a little bit earlier, but CD&T when it comes to your ewes and your lambs for enterotoxemia and tetanus, the Campylobacter vaccine or Vibrio vaccine, and then also chlamydia are all things that if you're going to vaccinate your ewes that you want to have on hand. During lambing season, when it comes to fighting some pregnancy toxemia or working through some of those ketosis issues, have some energy on hand. Simple things like a bottle of dextrose, propylene glycol, corn syrup, those things really work great. Other products like Power Punch will sometimes work as well. Something that's high energy, molasses will work as well if you need to get some energy into a sheep, and then some electrolytes as well are always good to have on hand when you might need something. Now, there are people that have hundreds of drugs in their medicine cabinet, and there's people that have the bare minimum. You got to do what works the best for you, what you are working with, and how much you want to spend, and what you can get your hands on in terms of drugs that need a prescription. So work with your veterinarian, kind of develop a plan of getting what things you need to have in your pharmacy. So a little bit talking about shearing prior to lambing. We always shear our ewes about 30-ish to 45 days before lambing here at the college. It just makes it a lot cleaner for the ewe and cleaner for the lamb. Our buildings stay a lot cleaner and drier. With our situation here, we need to feed our ewes outside every day. So they have to go out into the elements. And if they were full fleece, they would stay out there. They would get covered in snow. They would come back into the barn, that would melt off, and all that water ends up in the floor of our pens. We put so much more moisture into our pens, which therefore we're bedding more. So just by taking the wool off of them, they tend to stay in when they're done eating, and it keeps our buildings drier and warmer. Those nights when it's 40 below zero here, we'll keep it at 10, 15, even 20 above when all those ewes are sheared, because they're giving off so much more heat. And when they're staying inside, ewes are less likely to lay on their lambs when they're sheared. So that picture, that's not my picture. I borrowed that photo, but I think it's actually really neat to see what a sheep looks like under its fleece when you look at it that way. But all that wool on them, it's hard to feel where their lambs are. And sometimes those lambs want to snuggle in, and the ewe ends up laying on one. So by taking it off, she's less likely to do that. It gives you the chance to check their body condition score a lot easier. For rookie shepherds that haven't been around sheep, when they're full fleece, they all look thick. They all look bloomy. But there's times where sheep can be pretty thin underneath that fleece if you're not trained in terms of using your hands or using your eye to see through that wool. Ewes will consume a little bit more feed when they're sheared, especially in colder weather like we have up here. So we can keep that dry matter going into them. We can keep those feed sources up and hopefully limit a little bit of the pregnancy disease problems by keeping them consuming a little more feed. It's easier for the lambs to find the udder when they're sheared off. And then also I've found that ewes that are sheared move a lot easier. They can see easier. They move through our lambing room a lot better. They follow their lambs a lot better. It's just been a better situation by having our ewes sheared before we lamb. If you can't execute that, that's certainly all right. There are plenty of people that lamb in full fleece and have great luck doing it. Also, if you're going to do anything, you can crutch those ewes. You can shear their bags, shear their backsides, get them cleaned up, make it a little bit easier for those lambs to find the udders. Any questions on that?
In regards to the month or the temperature, does it matter when the ewes are sheared to avoid sickness?
A lot of times that question comes up. I always say the day after you shear, the temperature is going to plummet because that's just kind of how it works sometimes. But there's been times where we've sheared in pretty cold weather. And as long as those ewes are out of the wind, they've got a place to stay out of the wind, and they've got good bedding, and you've got them on good feed, and also they can stay dry. They can take quite a bit of cold. So watch the weather a little bit if you have that opportunity. But as long as, like we said, if you can lock them in an area where they're not going to have wind, they're not going to get wet, and they've got good bedding, they can handle a lot of cold. So I wouldn't worry too horribly much about the time or date of the year to do that. Just make sure you're checking those boxes on where you're keeping them. And really after about 5 to 7 days, they will fuzz up enough where they will stay just fine, depending on no matter how cold it is. All right, another thing that I like to do once those ewes are sheared before lambing is paint brand. Now, some of you might say, well, I know all my sheep visually. I only have 7 of them. I know them all by name. I don't need to paint brand them. But if you're lambing a bunch of sheep, it's good to paint brand them so you can identify them from a distance. So if a ewe is lambing, she's getting started, you don't have to get right up on top of her to read her ear tag. You can see her from a distance. Or if you've got somebody coming in to do your chores for you, or you're going to be gone and someone else is feeding, it's a lot easier who are unfamiliar with your sheep for them to say, hey, 8312 looks like she's going to lamb, or 8312 didn't eat tonight. They didn't even have to get up close to her to read her ear tag. They could see it from a distance. And then also, if you do have a set of barn cameras that you are watching your sheep, they're really easy to read their numbers when they're paint branded. You know exactly who they are just by seeing them paint branded. So that's something that we do here at NDSU. I know it takes us a lot of time. It is a very challenging task to do when you're doing it, but once it's done, it's certainly a great task done that makes your life a lot easier when it comes to lambing and watching your sheep. So record keeping. I think record keeping is really important to a successful sheep operation, any livestock operation for that matter. Take notes on everything, record everything. Ewe behavior. How was she in the lambing jug? Did she follow her lamb? Was she a good mom? Did she have a good udder? Were her lambs vigorous? Did they get up? Were they slow? Were they able to, did the mom follow her lambs when you wanted to move her from your drop area to her lambing jug? Did you have any issues? Were there any challenges? Did you have to pull it? What knowledge is power when it comes to making mating decisions, breeding decisions, selection, culling, all that information would be really easy to have by having that information written down. So you can never have too much information, in my opinion. And then finally, they can be handwritten or digital. If you got your cell phone in your hand, write some notes on them. If you're using an app in terms of keeping your records, use that. Sometimes writing it on a good old notebook is the best way to go about doing it. But regardless, take that information. I weigh our lambs here at birth just for curiosity. We use it for a little bit of information, but I like to see what our lamb birth weights are like, and the picture illustrates us weighing our lambs when they are born. So then the next thing I like to hit on here, I know we're running past an hour already, but when will she lamb? What to watch for? First one is she sunken at her hips? Is she getting soft or loose in her vaginal area? What's the color of her vulva? is a good indication of when she's getting close to lambing. Does she isolate herself from the group? Is she building a nest? Is her udder getting tight or full? Maybe she didn't come to the bunk to eat tonight is usually a telltale sign that she's getting close to lambing. She's a little more vocal, she's bellowing, she's pacing. Or another sign that says this ewes going to get close to lambing is they like to mother other lambs that are born. So if you've got a group of ewes in a big drop pen, if she's trying to mother other lambs, that means she's probably getting close. And is there any mucus or fluids visible at the time? So those are just a few to watch for. Those are probably ones that will start showing up 48 hours before they lamb, and then they gradually get closer until the event happens. When she starts lambing, be patient. Let you do the work. I know lots of times people just say, oh, I just can't take it. I want to get in there. I want to help her out. I want to get this over with. I want to get those lambs on the ground. I want to get them taken care of. Be patient, be calm, stay relaxed. Animals have been giving birth for thousands of years, and they know how to do it. They'll tell you, or they'll give you signs when you think you need to intervene. And some of those might be if there's a long time of straining and you're not seeing any progress. She's not getting any further along. You're not seeing a lamb. I always say about an hour is my threshold. If I don't see a lamb within an hour of her starting, I will check her. And there's times where you can see that there's an unusual presentation right off the bat. You might have feet and no head. You might have a head and no feet. You might just have a tail. The hooves might be tipped down, which give you an indication that the lamb is coming backwards. So if those are some situations that you see, that's when you need to intervene and help her out and get those lambs out. And then the best advice I can give you is stay calm and stay relaxed. If you do have to pull a lamb, the more calm and more slowly and more relaxed you do it, the better the outcome is going to be. Because when you get frustrated, that's when all of the challenges come out even worse. Don't ever be afraid to ask for help. That's probably one of the things that I've learned along through working with sheep and working here at NDSU is no matter how many sheep you've lambed, you've never seen it all. And somebody out there probably has. So make sure you have your veterinarian's number close. If you need to ask for some help, if you need to get help from your veterinarian, don't be afraid to call. A lot of times people call when it's too late. If you run into an issue and you need some help, don't be afraid to ask. Also, keep fellow breeders in your Rolodex. Call other sheep people. They have seen it all. We've been through it. They can talk you through situations. They can help you through it. Just look to your fellow breeders to help you out. Now with technology, FaceTime and video chats are a great way to learn by either watching people lamb sheep, or if you have a problem, say, hey, look at this. Let me FaceTime you and I want to show you what's happening, what's coming out of the backside of this ewe. What is this? Can you help me? I still do that with some people, and it's really been helpful. And then also on the flip side, always be willing to help a fellow shepherd. I always tell people that I keep my phone on all the time when I have students night lambing for me. And from the months of January to April, if I get a call from a sheep friend of mine at 2 a.m, it's probably because they have some kind of problem, they need some help, or they're just trying to stay awake lambing ewes. So don't be afraid to help those that have helped you and give back to some of those new or younger breeders as they get started in their sheep operations. So then here's just a little bit of my personal lambing advice, and you can take it with a grain of salt, but these are some of the things that I always tend to tell myself during lambing season. Sheep don't always read the book. Challenges will arise. Sheep people have experienced them all, and things will get better. Take every opportunity from a bad situation to learn from it. Make it better. Figure out how that happened, how we can prevent it, what we can do different. And also then commit that to your memory bank and say, okay, this is how that situation happened last time. This is what I'm going to do different. The other one that I always have to tell myself is don't waste a lot of time on animals that you lost. I know when you have a problem, you have an issue, it eats you alive. It's been your whole year's work. It's been that dream mating in the making, and all of a sudden it didn't go as planned. But I always have to tell myself, every minute I spend worrying about a lamb that I lost or a situation that didn't go right, it's that time I'm neglecting the ones that are still alive. So you got to put it past you. You got to move on, because if you worry about ones you can't fix a problem on, you're only neglecting the ones that are still alive. So just remember that. Take a little bit of time to worry, but don't dwell on it. You got to move on and worry about the ones that are still yet to lamb or the ones that are already born. And then the last part is enjoy the lambing process. This really truly is the result of a year's worth of work, time, effort, brain power, money, all those days worrying, all those days shearing or putting in cedars or treating and doing all those things, putting up hay bales, pitching manure, all of that comes to fruition here when those lambs are born. And that's your reward. That's your payment when you go forward, is to enjoy the lambing process. That's the next step in your breeding program. So with that kind of wraps up what I had for tonight. I hope you were able to pick up on a few things that will help your sheep operation, help you. There were a few things that you can use. At this time, I'd love to answer any other questions or talk about some situations, or if people on the call want to communicate with each other, I certainly think that's great as well to visit a little bit. So again, I thank you for your attention, and I'll handle any questions.
I've got a couple here for you, Skip, from the
Okay.
Q&A.
Sure.
So going back to nutrition,
Yep.
we have a question. When we ask the mill for sheep mix, they always want to know what we want in it. What recipe or ingredients do you recommend for pregnant ewes?
Typically, when it comes to a diet for pregnant ewes, something in that probably 12 to 14, 16% protein is probably about right. I say that you've got to have some kind of, maybe some corn, some oats, some soybean meal in there for some protein. But a lot of times when it comes to feeding your pregnant ewes, even good alfalfa and some shell corn, along with a solid vitamin mineral free choice mineral program, is about enough when it comes to providing your sheep enough nutrition. If you've got good hay and shell corn for some energy, those are the things that I think are the most important. But depending on how many sheep that you have, I also recommend, I know it's a little bit more expensive, but buying bagged feed, working through some of the feed companies that put that together, either their U mixes, buying that directly from them. I know you're paying a little more up front, but you know exactly what you're getting. But the short answer to that would be making sure that you got some corn, some oats, some soybean meal in there for a little bit of protein to add in there. Would be about the 3 big ingredients I'd put in there. Maybe you can use some soy hull pellets to cheapen some things up, but also really just it kind of depends what your mill and what your co-op might have in terms of ingredients. So
this is Amanda with the Suffolk Association. I just want to jump in. Skip, you had mentioned that the nutrition thing is maybe not something that you're as knowledgeable about. I just did want to mention that a couple of years ago we did a webinar on late gestation and lactation nutrition. Rob Zielinski with Hubbard Feeds did that. That is archived on our Facebook page and at suffolks.org. So for any of you who are interested in the nutrition component and maybe want a little more detail, I would suggest that you go and take a look at that presentation. And if you have any questions, contact us on Facebook or send an email to the office, and I can certainly get you the direct link for that. Sorry, I just wanted to mention that.
That's awesome. And Rob is sharp and knowledgeable, and he raises sheep, and he's a good guy that is certainly willing to help. So yeah, I will probably even reference that myself.
So the next question that I've got for you is how to best know when she's done before feeling the need to arm her and check for a second or third lamb that could be stuck inside while the ewe has been lambing. Or
That's a good question. A lot of times a ewe will give you an indication of when she's going to have a second one, and she'll have the first lamb. And if she passes a second water bag and that water bag is clear, she's going to have a second lamb. That's a real telltale sign. She's also going to give you a few other indicators. She's going to still have some contractions. She's probably going to maybe wander away from that lamb just a little bit. She'll maybe take breaks while she's mothering it. She might arch her back a little bit, is a good indicator that she possibly is going to have a second one. Sometimes you can even bump the side of the ewe and maybe feel if there's a second lamb. But a lot of times the second lamb is going to come relatively quick, and you'll see her pass her placenta. Once the placenta's out, you're most likely not going to have a second lamb. So I would give her about 30-ish minutes or so. If you feel the need, you have to check her, but she's going to give you plenty of signals that says she's done or she's going to have another one, usually within 30 minutes.
I have a few basic
the next question is,
Go ahead, Catherine.
oh, okay. The next was just, do you have any timing recommendations for tail ringing or tetanus shots for lamb?
When it comes to banding tails, we band ours within 2 or 3 days when they leave the lambing jug. The reason we do that is we're just trying to limit the number of times that we have to handle them. So that works best for us by doing it then. Some people wait a little bit longer and band them maybe at 7 days or a little bit past that. But I recommend doing it when your ewe leaves the lambing jug. It's just something that is one less thing you have to do later. And by giving your ewes CD&T, that tetanus shot's on board with that, 3 to 4 weeks before they lamb. That lamb is good for about 30-ish days once it's born, that you can give it its next round of CD&T at 30 days and then booster it again in 21. Anything else?
Just one more question I have from the Zoom is everyone has their own opinion, but your personal opinion on when to wean lambs off?
Yeah, again, that's situationally, it depends on what your operation works for you. Do you want to try to wean them in one big group? If let's say you only have 20 ewes and a small group of lambs, do you wean them all at once? So they range in age from maybe 75 days to 45 days. You can do that. I try to shoot right at about 60-ish days, give or take, or about 75 to 55 days. I try to do them in groups. So we keep them right about at 60 days is roughly the average, 65 days. Most of the time, the biggest lamb or the oldest lamb in that group will be 75. The youngest lamb will be 55 to 50 days old. But I try to do them in 20-ish day windows, with 60 days being the average.
Skip, I have a couple questions coming in from Facebook. First
Sure.
one is, do you suggest deworming the ewes after the lambs arrive?
Yeah, that's actually one thing that we've started doing as well. Is I've totally moved away from deworming our ewes at all while they're pregnant, trying to get everything done before we breed and then during gestation. Most of the time here they're dry lotted, so we don't have to worry quite so much about being infected with parasites. And then we deworm and trim feet when the ewes leave the jug. Again, I think you get a good catch on your dewormers at that time, just because it works good at more or less shocking the system once that ewe has lambed, and you do get a good catch on removing those worms after they lamb. So yeah, that's what we've done in the past, is it's worked well. Deworm, trim feet when they leave the jug, and then prep them in the spring before they go to grass.
Next question is, how many days or weeks prior to lambing should you keep those ewes off pasture?
Actually, depending on your particular operation or farming system, this fall we actually lambed a set of ewes on pasture. So in a fall lambing program where you're lambing in maybe September and October, you can lamb sheep right on grass. It's actually been very useful and beneficial to lamb them on pasture. Now, if you're in the upper Midwest and you're going to start lambing in, let's say, January, and we have an open fall like we have now with not a lot of snow, and you're still able to keep some ewes outside and maybe feeding them round bales, or they're foraging on some pasture you might have left or some cover crops, I would try to get them in probably 3 weeks, 2 weeks for sure before they start lambing, just so you can monitor them a little bit closer. But if you're lambing in a warm climate or the fall of the year, and you can do it in September and October, and you want to lamb them on pasture, I say go for it.
One more question from Facebook. How
Sure.
often do you see mummified lambs? Is it something that can occur yearly in the same ewe?
Every once in a while, I will see a mummified lamb. You'll have one big, normal, healthy looking lamb, and then you'll have one that looks really pretty ugly. It's mummified. It's gross looking. It's dry. It certainly does happen. What the cause of it is probably certainly isn't from an abortive disease by any means, just a developmental problem. And it really comes down to how well you keep track of your records. I guess just trying to go off the top of my head, I can't recall any ewes that I know of having a mummified lamb 2 years in a row. I've seen it in older ewes. I've seen it in first time lambing ewes. So I don't know if there's really truly a pattern. But if you're seeing it in certain ewes multiple times, might need to, I don't know what it is you would have to examine or what might be the problem, but maybe it's a genetic issue if you're seeing it in multiple sheep or multiple times in the same ewe. Anything else?
I don't think I have any other questions from the chat unless anyone else does and wants to jump in.
Okay.
Well, thank you again, Skip, for doing this tonight for us. We're so excited to have you, and thank you to everyone who logged on. We hope that we've learned a lot of things from it tonight, so thank you very much. Just to reiterate, this will be archived on suffolks.org as well as our Facebook page, UJSSA. So if anyone wants to go back to this, feel free to do that. But otherwise, I think unless you have some last remarks, we can be done.
Sounds good. Thank you guys for having me. Again, my contact information's there. I enjoy talking sheep, enjoy helping producers. So if there's anything that you need or you're in a bind, don't be afraid to call or ask or shoot me a text. I'd love to help you out any way possible, because I know how frustrating sometimes those challenges can be during lambing season, and just having somebody to bounce some ideas off of makes a big difference. So again, I thank you guys for having me and appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.